After pointlessly making the second film into a prequel and opening the third film with a flashback to Indy's teen years, George Lucas opted to test his Star Wars prequel trilogy with the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles in 1992. Filling in details that no one really cared about, this TV spin-off at least boasted some high production value and hours of edutainment. You see, the series had an ulterior motive to teach its audience about important historical people and events, which of course is what everyone was looking for in a show based on a trio of movies with functional voodoo dolls and face-melting artifacts. The Chronicles hop from two periods in Indy's youth, with the younger kid version being played by Corey Carrier and the teen being played by Powder, taking over for the late River Phoenix in The Last Crusade. Every episode would feature a frame story starring George Hall as the aging, eye-patched Henry Jones of the modern day, who would find himself recounting various tales of his childhood to whoever would be passing by the old coot that day. The one exception is Mystery of the Blues, an episode in which George Lucas somehow duped Harrison Ford himself into showing up for the wraparound, appearing in a scene that's set only a few years before Crystal Skull, actually. Sadly, Hall's hammy performance would be lost in some Greedo shot-first revisionism a few years later, but we'll get to that in a moment. Since reviews of every single episode would just drag on this video forever, we'll just stick to the first episode, The Curse of the Jackal. It's a nice choice since it features both grade school and high school Indy in loosely connected segments. We begin with some kids running in a museum, which summons the not-quite ghost of Indy to punish them with a pair of life stories. The first segment establishes the really young Indy Chronicles as a pretty fun kids show that feels nothing like the source material, but at least has its charms. We meet his mom and his dad, the latter of whom is giving us the best pseudo-Connery this side of Highlander the Animated Series, as they prepare to travel the world. After picking up a school marm for the kid from the stock character depot, they arrive in Egypt for some gorgeous location shooting. And wouldn't you know it, soon they're running into Lawrence of Arabia, establishing from the start that this series will be taking the Forrest Gump approach to early 20th century history. Tie novels and such pursue this absurd path even further, with Indy even ending up on the Titanic at one point. Too bad he couldn't have shown Jack and Rose how to float on the same piece of wood, am I right? Anyway, T.E. Lawrence spooks Indy with the possibility of living mummies. But when they actually run into a murder mystery involving a mummy, nothing actually happens, since we certainly can't have supernatural goings-on in an Indiana Jones story. Instead, someone steals the titular Jackal from the mummy's headdress, and Indy won't solve the case until years later when he's captured by Pancho Villa. Yes, the second half of this episode takes place when the 16-year-old Indy joins with the famous Mexican revolutionary. An event so important in Indy's life that George Lucas later shoehorned a reference to it in Crystal Skull. After nearly being shot by George Patton, I read your book, and raiding William Randolph Hearst's Mexican getaway, Indy has a change of heart and leaves the revolution effort along with a Belgian buddy, but not before confronting the man who stole the Egyptian artifact from earlier. Indy appears to kill him, which is hardly out of character for his adult self, but earlier scenes seem to indicate that he had no taste for bloodshed. And that really gets us into a problem with a series like this. We're seeing the character before he develops characteristics that define him, so he might as well be a completely different character altogether, especially in this small child form. But alas, if you wish to see the episode I just described, you're out of luck, since George Lucas decided to go edit happy on this series around the same time he massacred the Star Wars trilogy. He scrapped the old Indy stuff altogether and split the two halves of the episode into two separate new episodes that have been Frankenstein together with other material, either from different episodes or from newly shot sequences that don't even begin to blend in with the old scenes. The first half shows up in My First Adventure, which features new and inferior voiceover narration from Carrier, as well as new scenes that have been filmed years later with the kid that are just not even the least bit convincing blending in with the old material. Not that such a clash would be a problem for George Lucas.
Look, Chopper, next time you want to talk to me...
Now the second half appears as the end of My Spring Break Adventure, which opens with the entirety of a completely unrelated episode about cars.
Why do you need such big wheels?
Truth be told, ever since I was a teenager, I wanted to drive the hottest car in town.
And awkwardly segues into the Pancho Villa stuff with some after-the-fact footage. I get the appeal of seeing the entire show in chronological order, but if you can't do it convincingly, don't do it. And in typical George Lucas fashion, the DVD releases don't even include the George Hall scenes as special features. Still, even in its currently desecrated form, Young Indiana Jones offers a nice option for parents who want to introduce their kids to the hero they grew up watching on the big screen without actually having to repeat their own parents' irresponsibility in showing kids all the stuff that's in those indie films. It's suitably family-friendly without skimping out on the scale that we expect from the franchise. And with that, I remind you that I put the cool in Cine-cool.